Hello, my name is Tristan Haracha, and today I will be doing my presentation on how radiation affects the human body for the long term. So a little bit of an intro. We'll be going over the history on radiation with humanity, the effects of radiation on the human body. There isn't too much of a real hypothesis. There is a little bit, but this is mostly just a bunch of papers done and put together. We're going to be going over the lifespan study, what it is, and how it's helping us understand long-term effects of radiation. Some of the results from some of the research that has been done, what these results mean for humanity, obviously conclusion and references. So a little bit of abstract. The paper I'm basing this presentation off of is called The Long-Term Effects of Radiation Exposure on Health from Hiroshima and Nagasaki to Fukushima 1. It talks a small amount about the history of radiation in humans. The paper talks about LSS, or the lifespan study, and how it has helped researchers and doctors to get a better understanding of radiation. It talks about different cancers and other diseases caused by excessive radiation exposure. So the hypothesis. There was no real hypothesis for this. Was many papers put into one paper, more as a conclusion. The hypothesis I was able to broadly understand is the people who have experienced the bombs dropping will have adhere effects on their health because of all the radiation that was released at once. I came to the conclusion of this hypothesis due to most of the knowledge we as humanity have gained from radiation was from the nuclear blasts that happened in Japan. So a little bit of history on radiation in humans. The effects of radiation on humans was first discovered due to X-rays being discovered by Wilhelm Conrad Röntgen in 1895. Skin burns and epilation, or hair removal, was reported in early 1896 from the same people who were near these X-rays almost on a constant daily basis. In 1930, the invention of the high voltage X-ray tube started to cause more problems. The higher dose of radiation would penetrate further and get into the patient's actual bone marrow. Injuries from highly exposed tissue are classified as deterministic effects because they will always occur once a threshold of radiation exposure is met or exceeded, specifically of 0.5 gray. Gray is the amount of dosage or radiation absorbed. 1 gray is the international system of units, equivalent of 100 rad, which is equal to an absorbed dose of 1 joule per kilogram. So why the LSS was created? 77 years ago, on August 6, 1945, an atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, Japan. This was the first time in human history this has ever happened. 3 days later, another atomic bomb was dropped on Nagasaki, Japan. A uranium-235 bomb was used for Hiroshima, and a plutonium-239 bomb was used for Nagasaki. Besides the obvious damages to people's bodies of burns, cuts, bruises, they had also taken in serious amounts of radiation as well. The health effects of large nuclear explosions/disasters are devastating and have long-term effects on the human body. Because of this, long-term studies were needed to see if there is any correlation between being irradiated and a decline in someone's long-term health. The LSS, or the Lifespan Study, was created and started in 1950 to study the people of Japan who had experienced the atom bombs going off. It was to get a better understanding of what radiation does to the human body. The info that the LSS was able to gather has helped humanity assess the risks of radiation. In 1957, the Japanese government started providing support for those survivors of the bombs. They passed the A-bomb survivors medical care law. This law was to give survivors medical care and welfare help. They were also given a survivor health book, which also enabled them to receive more medical help and financial help. The knowledge from epidemiological studies helped in the formation of these laws. The LSS doesn't go off of just the bombing of Japan, though. Nuclear disasters can also be related to nuclear meltdowns at power plants. After the Chernobyl incident, it was extremely difficult to get to correct dosage of assessments due to the info of the incident not being disclosed immediately, mostly due to because this was a military installment and this took some time. So the first major study the LSS did, the LSS cohort are representatives of atom bomb survivors. They did their first major study in 1950 with the survivors of the bombs, which consisted of roughly 94,000 people. They also had an additional 26,000 people who had not been in either city during the explosions to be used as a more control group. Of the 94,000 survivors, 86,500 of them had doses successfully estimated. 2,400 had been assessed with a weighted colon dose of 1 gray or more. About 68,500 had a dose of less than 100 milligray. 48,000 were very trivial. Their doses were less than 5 milligray. Tissue-specific doses were analyzed 3 times to get a very accurate reading of just other than 1. The LSS first major study continuing. The survivors or patients were screened for cancers every time they had a medical meeting with researchers or local doctors. They were screened just like how people are normally screened for different types of cancers. Some examples are mammograms for breast cancer, colonoscopies for colon cancer, and pap smears for cervical cancer. Most people who were near the blast not only suffered injury from the blast, but ended up getting cancer or multiple types of cancer. The survivors' children, that they had also had health concerns as well once they were born. Some methods the LSS had. The methods of the LSS are hard to pinpoint. After their first major study, the LSS was more of a hub for many other scientists and researchers. When I say hub, I do mean more of a place where researchers' data was uploaded for others to see. The people at the LSS still did their own findings and research as well. Radiation-related cancer. Solid cancers were prominent among survivors of the bombs that were near the hypocenter, or the spot of first contact, when the bombs first went off. Excess cases of leukemia started to arise within the first 3 years of the bombs. These cases peaked usually within 6 to 8 years of the bombs going off. Increase in solid cancers have been reported roughly 10 years after the bombs and continue to be reported to this very day. It has been noticed that most of these reports were from people who were kids when the bombs went off. This suggests that kids are more susceptible to radiation exposure than adults or even the elderly. The risk of all types of cancers was significantly increased after the bombs. The risk of bladder, female breast, lung, brain, thyroid, colon, esophagus, ovary, stomach, liver, and skin cancer were much more prominent in the survivors who were a part of the LSS. ERR, or excessive relative risk, was also noted to be much higher in females than in males. Some investigation on whether radiation and smoking was more likely to cause cancer was done as well. They found that exposure to either increases your risk, and people who have both are even more susceptible to cancer than those who did not. Some radiation-related diseases, not cancers. The mortality rate for heart diseases was noticed to be increased depending on the dosage that you received. This was found by people who were participated in health examinations, info from mail-in questionnaires, and mortality statistics. Higher doses increase the risk of strokes. Radiation can cause serious damage to the circulatory system and chronic kidney disease, which in turn can also increase the chance of cardiovascular disease. It is more common for radiation to cause cancer than diseases, so just keep that in mind though. Some fetal exposure. Fetuses that are exposed to radiation while still in the womb have disturbed brain functionality or mental retardation. Fetuses exposed with a dosage of 0.5 gray or higher have the highest risk during the gestation period of 8 to 15 weeks. This effect is deterministic because of fetal brain cells are highly susceptible to radiation during this period. The risk of cancer is also highly prominent, though not certain. Some further study of my own. Radiation has always fascinated me personally, from how it can be power for like everything that we use, but also just the destructive nature of it, and how it can also be the end of life. I would like to go into further study of the LSS, just on a personal note, and what they're doing for humanity today. Perhaps they're finding new ways to beat cancer and to prevent sickness. So the conclusion, the knowledge that we have today can be thanked to epidemiological studies that have been done primarily by LSS. Many studies have been done, but in the long run, these studies are really just beginning. The devastation that happened to Hiroshima and Nagasaki was tremendously horrible, but it has allowed a huge step forward in our knowledge of how radiation interacts within the human body, from the fetus stage all the way to the elderly stage. Now, I understand this presentation and paper didn't really have too much of a hypothesis or too much results. How I see it, the bombs were dropped was the real experiment. The hypothesis could be the human body will adversely be affected by radiation because radiation causes genetic damage. The method was using LSS to do studies on the survivors and how they were affected. So the results can be summarized up as radiation causes cancer in human beings. Very plain and simple. It can cause some diseases, but mostly cancer. Radiation is one hell of a thing. Obviously, this causes death. My references page. I mostly just used the paper that I basically went over. I did have to look into what a gray was, because the paper didn't do a very good job of explaining that.